Okay, now let's continue with our pathology video series. And now we're going to talk about cellular adaptation to stress. So cellular adaptation is simply a reversible change in the number, size, phenotype, metabolic activity, or function of the cell. So it is a reversible change. It's something that can be reversed. So it is a reversible change in the number, size, phenotype, metabolic activity or function of the cells. So remember, this adaptation is due to a stress. So in my previous video, we looked at how a cell changes due to stress. So we are going to have something that is going to stress a normal cell. So a cell will try to adapt by changing, by changing in the number, that is proliferating to increase in number, or simply the size of the cell becomes large or small, or the phenotype of the cells, or metabolic activity or function of the cells. So that is what we call adaptation. So it's simply an irreversible change. So this response to changes is due to the condition of the environment where that cell is. Okay, and we have four forms of adaptations, or four types of adaptations. So we have hypertrophy, which is associated with the size of the cell, and we have hyperplasia, atrophy, and metaplasia. So we're going to look at these four types of adaptation in great detail. But for now, let's first understand the classification of adaptation. So adaptation can be physiological adaptation or pathological adaptation. So physiological adaptation or physiologic adaptation is simply a response of cells to normal stimulation. So here a cell is responding to normal stimulation. So these stimulations can be by hormone. So a hormone comes to stimulate a cell, or an endogenous chemical mediator. So in this case, we can talk about growth factors. So growth factors can come and stimulate a cell to change. Okay, so to change, either to increase in number, size, or in its phenotypic, or it can change in the function of that cell. Okay, so a normal stimulation by hormones or endogenous chemicals such as growth hormone is what we call physiologic adaptation. Okay, so example of physiologic adaptation, we have the hormone induced enlargement of the breast. So during puberty and pregnancy, the breast enlarge. Okay, so they become larger in size. So that hormone induced enlargement is normal stimulation. Okay, it's a normal stimulation. So the breast will become larger in size. And then another example is uterus during pregnancy. So the uterus as well will increase in size during pregnancy. So that's a very good example of full physiological adaptation. So the cells are adapting to the stress. Okay, so apart from physiological adaptation, we also have pathological adaptation. So pathological adaptation here is simply a response to stress that allows cells to modulate their structure and function to escape injury at the expense of normal function. So pathological here, we're talking about a normal cell changing its structure. So the structure of the cell is changed, and the function is also changed to escape injury, okay, at the expense of its normal function. So remember here, the normal function of the cell will be lost in pathological adaptation. So this is mostly seen in diseases in short. Okay, so for example, we have squamous metaplasia of the bronchus in the smokers. So the cells which are lining the bronchus of the respiratory tract may change, okay, may change their shape to become squamous in nature, okay, to adapt to the stress, in this case the chemicals which are in the smoke. So that change is pathological. So this is pathological because it is not a normal stimulation by the hormones or endogenous chemicals mediators. Okay, so now let's go and now look at the 4 forms or types of adaptation in great detail. So the first one is hypertrophy. So hypertrophy, this term, we can separate it into two. We have the first term there, which is hyper, and we also have trophy. So hyper, we can say it is an increase, means increase or high. Okay, so hyper, that is increase, and then trophy, that is the shape. Okay, so hypertrophy simply means an increase in size of cells leading to increase in the size of an organ. Okay, so the increase in the size of cells leading to increase in the size of an organ. So when the cells increase in size, even the organ will become larger in size. So that is hypertrophy. It's simply an increase in size of the cells. And then in hypertrophy, no new cells are formed. So here we are talking about cells which have limited capacity to proliferate. So these are permanent cells which are just becoming larger in size due to a stress. Okay, so that is mostly in pure hypertrophy. That's where we see no new cells or no proliferation taking place, but the cells are just increasing in their size. Then apart from that, we can this hypertrophy, which is an increase in size of cells, can occur together with the hyperplasia. So hyperplasia is one of the types of adaptation or forms of adaptation. We're going to look at it in the we're going to look at it later. But hypertrophy and hyperplasia can occur together at the same time in the same organ. So what are the causes of hypertrophy? So hypertrophy can be caused by an increase in functional demand. So if an organ has increase in functional demand, then that the cells of that organ will increase in size. Then apart from that, the causes of hypertrophy can be growth factors, stimulation by growth factors, and hormones. So certain hormones can stimulate organs to become larger in size, okay, or growth factors. So examples of hypertrophy is seen in a normal or in pathological conditions. So in physiological hypertrophy, we have enlargement of the uterus, okay? So during pregnancy, the uterus will enlarge due to the fetus which is growing in the uterus. So I have this diagram here. So this diagram here is simply showing the normal uterus there. Okay, so we have the normal uterus there, but during pregnancy, to accommodate the fetus, the uterus will increase, the cells of the uterus will increase in size. Okay, they will hypertrophy, and they also undergo hyperplasia. Okay, so the number of the cells will increase and the size of the cells will increase, as shown in this diagram here. We have these cells. This is in the normal uterus. Okay, So we have cells there which are small in size, but when during pregnancy they will be hypertrophied. As we can see in these ones, we have large smooth muscle cells of the uterus which have been enlarged, so they have hypertrophied. Okay, so that is a physiological, it's a normal thing in during pregnancy. So it's a physiological example of hypertrophy. Then apart from that, another physiological example of hypertrophy is observed in skeletal and cardiac muscles of the heart. So skeletal muscles hypertrophy due to work overload. So those who do workouts in the gym, the skeletal muscles, they will enlarge in size. Okay, instead of proliferating, but they just become larger in size. That is hypertrophy. Then apart from that, the heart muscle as well, the cardiac muscle, can increase in size due to workload. So that is physiological and it's normal. But under pathological conditions, that is an example of pathological hypertrophy, we have cardiac enlargement. In this case now we're talking about in a condition or in a disease such as hypertension or aortic valve diseases. So aortic valve diseases such as aortic regurgitation or aortic stenosis, where we have the aortic valves failing to close properly, we are going to have the cardiac muscles of the affected part enlarged, becoming big in size. Okay, so as shown in this diagram here, so we have a normal myocyte, that is the cell of the cardiac muscle. So during adaptation, response to increased load, that is in a normal physiologic way, they will be hypertrophied, so they will become big in size, and then the heart will be observed as shown in this diagram here. So this is in a normal heart, that is in the normal myocyte, and then in an event where the cells have become large or they have hypertrophied, so the heart will look like that. So the lumen will be somehow reduced in size. Okay, but this is different from where the cells are dying, that is where necrosis is taking place. So in an event of ischemia, where we have reduced where we have a blocked supply to muscle cells, to cells of the cardiac muscle, we are going to experience necrosis. So the cells will not hypertrophy, but they will simply die. So in this cardiac muscle here, we have part of it which is undergoing necrosis. Okay, so but the takeaway message here is that when a cardiac muscle is stressed, in this case we are talking about the load is increased, the normal size of the myocyte will increase and become larger in size. Okay, so apart from hypertrophy, we said we have hyperplasia. So hyperplasia, here we have hyper, which is an increase, and pleasure, that is the cells. Okay, so that is increase in the number of cells. So we have hyper and pleasure. So hyper, that is increase, pleasure, that is cells. Okay, no, the number. Okay, so increase in the number of cells, that is hyperplasia. So increase in the number of cells in an organ, that stems from increased proliferation. So remember here, the increase in number of cells, the cells which are increasing in number are due to increased proliferation, so the cells are dividing and dividing, so that will lead to an increased number of cells. So it can also be pathological, physiological, or pathological. So in physiological hyperplasia, this is observed in proliferation of the glandular epithelium of the female breast. Okay, so the female breast during puberty and pregnancy, the cells of the breast will undergo what we call hyperplasia. They will increase in size and the breast will appear to be large in size. Okay, and then apart from that, another example of physiological hyperplasia is observed in the liver. So when we remove, or when someone loses a certain mass of the liver, the hepatocytes of the liver will be able to proliferate and replace the lost tissue. So that is an example of a physiological hyperplasia. Then in pathological hyperplasia, mostly it is caused by excessive hormonal or growth factor stimulation. So if we have hormonal or growth factors which are excessively released, then we are going to experience pathological hyperplasia. So we have the release of these growth factors and hormones more than normal. So this is observed in benign prostatic hyperplasia. So the prostate gland in a male reproductive organ will be overly stimulated by the androgens. So androgens, in this case now in men, we are talking about steroids such as the testosterone. Okay, so they will stimulate the prostate gland and it will become large in size. So that is an example of a pathological condition because it is not normal. Then apart from that, we also have another example here, which is endometrial hyperplasia. So this is seen in women. So the endometrium of the uterus is stimulated by the estrogen during the menstrual cycle. So once the menses are done, the estrogen levels should reduce. Okay, but what is seen in endometrial hyperplasia is that the levels of estrogen are not reduced, so that will result in overstimulation of the endometrium. So the proliferation of the endometrium will continue, okay, and then that will lead to abnormal menstrual bleeding. So there will be bleeding, abnormal bleeding during the menstrual cycle. So another example of pathological hyperplasia is observed in skin warts. So skin wart is simply a condition or a disease which is caused by a papilloma virus. So in here we are going to observe masses of hyperplastic epithelium, as we can see in this diagram here. So that is a mass of hyperplastic epithelium. So the epithelium are the cells of the skin are undergoing what dividing and making these lesions which are observed in these diagrams. So that is an example of a pathological because it is occurring in a condition or in a disease. So apart from hyperplasia, we have atrophy. So atrophy, that is reduction in size. So here we are going to have shrinkage in the size of cells by the loss of cell substance. Okay, so the substance of the cell, either the cytoplasm or the organelles which are inside the cell, are going to be lost and then the cell will shrink. Remember, here the cell is not dead, it is still viable, but the function may be diminished. Then the cause of atrophy can be decreased workload. Okay, so in someone who was exercising, like those who go to the gym, if they when they stop, those cells which enlarged, after some time they will undergo atrophy. So that is due to decreased workload. But a good example is seen in immobilization of a limb in a fracture. So when someone has a fracture in the limb will be mobilized. So once it is mobilized, there will be decreased workload in that limb. So what will happen is that the cells in that limb will atrophy, so they will reduce in size. Then apart from that, the cause of atrophy can be loss of innervation. So that is innervation, not innovation. So when the nerve supply to an organ is lost, so those cells will atrophy, they will become small in size. Then endocrine stimulation, so loss of endocrine stimulation can also lead to atrophy. Then apart from that, we have aging. So aging, senile, which is called senile atrophy. In most old people, we have atrophy of the brain. So the brain will shrink, the brain cells will shrink in size. So that is what we call senile atrophy. So aging is one of the causes of atrophy. Apart from that, we have diminished blood supply. So when an organ has reduced blood supply, the cells won't receive more nutrition, more nutrients and oxygen, so they will atrophy. So examples of physiological and pathological atrophy. So physiological, we have loss of hormonal stimulation in menopause. So in menopause, hormonal stimulation such as the estrogen will reduce. Okay, estrogen levels in the circulation will reduce in menopause. So what will happen is that the ovaries will shrink and they will become small in size. So that is physiological. Okay, and then apart from that, under pathological conditions, we have the innervation. Denervation, that is loss of innervation. Okay, so this is seen in conditions where someone has lost innervation of the lower extremities or any part of the body. That organ will atrophy. The organ will seem to be very small in size. So the last form or type of adaptation is metaplasia. So metaplasia here is simply it's a change in which one type of cell type is replaced by another cell type. Okay, so a cell type which is sensitive to a particular stress is replaced by another cell type better able to withstand the adverse environment. Okay, so what is happening here is that we have, let's say, in the lining of the bronchus and the respiratory airway. So here we have cells which are columnar in shape. But what will happen now is that these cells will become squamous instead of being in columnar state. That is in someone who smokes. So in those people who smoke cigarettes, they will have these cells will be, instead of being columnar, they will become squamous. So they will become flat like this. Okay, so this type of transformation from columnar to squamous, okay, so from one cell type which is columnar in shape to a squamous form, that is what we call metaplasia. So this is mostly seen in the esophagus during the gastroesophageal reflux, where we have the content of the stomach, which is acidic, reflecting back into the esophagus. So the lining of the stomach is the cells of the stomach are columnar in shape due to the acid. But now the lining of the esophagus, this side, is squamous. So if here we have a sphincter, the gastroesophageal sphincter here, we have the sphincter which blocks the acid from reflexing back into the esophagus. But in the case where this content comes into the esophagus, these cells here will change. The cells which are there will change from squamous, then they'll become columnar. So that is metaplasia. Okay, as we can see in this diagram here, we also have these columnar cells which are now replaced by squamous cells which are flat. So this is observed in the bronchus, in the airway, in people who smoke, and this can can lead to cancer. Okay, so this is a histology diagram which shows the columnar cells which are now being replaced by the squamous cells. So this replacement is not phenotypic. It's not a phenotypic change where we have the already differentiated cells, but the stem cells themselves are the ones which are reprogrammed to differentiate into new cell pathway. So instead of differentiating into, so we have a columnar cell, it should differentiate into another columnar cell. So this columnar stem cell should differentiate and form columnar stem cells. But in this case, we have a columnar cell which is being reprogrammed to form squamous cells. So that is what is observed in metaplasia. So mostly it is in smokers. The lining of the airways are replaced by from columnar, which are the cells which secretes the mucus and they are ciliated, to the form which is squamous. Okay, so that is where that this form is observed, and also in the gastroesophageal reflux, where we have the content of the stomach reflexing back into, going back into the esophagus. There we are going to have a transformation from columnar to, from squamous to columnar. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave your comment in the comment section.